And the first program I wanted to mention, this one is in person only, and it's Kansas City Jazz, the Golden Years. We've got Kent Roush, who is a member of the Vine Street Rumble Jazz Orchestra, who will be exploring what is considered the golden age of jazz here in Kansas City, so the 1930s and 40s. So we've got that at a number of different branches spread out over the next couple of weeks. Next, this one is also an in-person program, but Christina Light, who is a travel writer, is going to be sharing the hidden gems in Missouri and in the Midwest. So places where you can see moonbows, synchronous fireflies, wild horses, are just some of the things that are out there for nature lovers and outdoor enthusiasts. And that one, again, is in person only at a variety of branches over the next 2 months. On July 22nd, we have art historian Martha Chicharo, who will be talking about architectural wonders throughout history. So she'll be exploring everything from the temples of Egypt, Greece, and Rome to the Romanesque and Gothic cathedrals. And she'll look at how these works illustrate man's creative and engineering prowess and how we continue to see those achievements in our 21st century architecture. On July 24th at 6:30, also on Zoom, our naturalist friends with the Missouri Department of Conservation are going to be back for Owls Are a Hoot. They'll be exploring the owls that we have here in Missouri and sharing lots of facts about them. That one, you do need to register to receive the Zoom link. And then finally, Dr. Thierfelder will be back with us on July 31st at 6:30 for Mark Twain, the quintessential American novelist. So Samuel Langhorne Clemens, who went by the name Mark Twain, was a humorist, journalist, lecturer, and novelist who garnered international fame for his travel narratives as well as his adventure stories of boyhood. So we'll learn all about his fascinating life. With that, I am going to stop sharing my screen here, and I will turn it over to Dr. Thierfelder to get started with tonight's program. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. And you should be seeing my screen now, full screen.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All righty. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to Learning from Home and welcome to the Mid-Continent Public Library's presentation of We Are the Martians, 75 Minutes on Mars. My name is Dr. Bill Thierfelder, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired professor of arts and humanities and docent emeritus from the American Museum of Natural History in New York. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I'm speaking to you from this evening, and where I'm an artist, writer, and lecturer. I also return regularly to New York, where I continue my work at the museum and enjoy the wonders of the Big Apple. Now, since we can't cover everything about this evening's topic in one 75-minute presentation, I invite you to take a deeper dive on my website, which is makingwings.net. And in this case, it's deeper dive number 77. And let me show you. So it's one word, Making Wings, and it's .net. And let's make sure that we are sharing here. You should be seeing now my homepage. And if you go to the menu in the upper left corner, you're going to see a drop down. Please feel free to visit any of these, but we want to go to deeper dives. And this is going to be 77. So you go to the second bunch of dives and click on that downward arrow. And once again, there are a lot of drop downs. Again, please feel free to visit any of these. These are programs that I either have given or will be giving in the future. This one is for tonight, number 77. We Are the Martians. And when you go to my website, what you will be finding are some background information, suggested media, lots of web resources, both print and video. And then some of the focus areas tonight will be historic Mars missions, Mars in fiction, Mars in film, Mars on TV, and even some current information about how people plan to live on Mars. And in the case of uh, if you want to go to any of these, so for example, if you wanted to explore Mars as it has appeared in television programs, you just click on the link and you're going to find all kinds of great stuff there. And when you're done, you click it off and you're back on my page. So it's one-stop shopping. So hope you can take advantage of that. Makingwings.net, deeper dive 77. Everything that you're going to hear in the program this evening uses the web resources and books that you just saw on my website. But for this presentation, I especially used the following sources to build its structure and its script: NASA and the European Space Agency, the Planetary Society, space.com and exploremars.org, National Geographic and Smithsonian, and Wikipedia and Britannica. Now, one of the things that you just saw on my website was suggested media. A City on Mars by Kelly and Zach Weinersmith, published in 2023, is probably one of the most thorough books written about the pros and cons of colonizing Mars. Discovering Mars by William Sheeman and Jim Bell is very accessible and another good introduction to the topic of observing and exploring the red planet. By the way, as I give you these titles in the PowerPoint here, if you don't have a paper and pencil handy, it's all on my website and you can get this information there too. The Case for Mars, The Plan to Settle the Red Planet and Why We Must, by Robert Zubrin, first published in 1996 and updated in 2011, remains the classic, presenting some of the strongest arguments for humanity's need to expand beyond our planet. And Stephen Pentranik's excellent 2015 How We'll Live on Mars became the basis for a terrific National Geographic Channel 12-episode docudrama called Mars. And it aired between 2016 and 2018. And the series is available on DVD and streaming services like Amazon Prime and Nat Geo. Nat Geo published a companion book to the series written by Leonard David, with a foreword by executive producer Ron Howard. And finally, for more viewing enjoyment, I recommend the Netflix original documentary, The Mars Generation. Any or all of these books and films that I've just suggested will provide you with thought-filled investigations into the red planet, our millennia-old fascination with it, and our quest to travel there. Okay, I fully confess that I am a Mars addict. From the time I saw Invaders from Mars and It, the Terror from Beyond Space as a little boy, I was hooked. And the TV show that ran from 1963 to 1966 called My Favorite Martian, with the always wonderful Ray Walston and Bill Bixby, sealed the deal. And I'm hoping that I can impart some of that same enthusiasm to you this evening. So, where does the title for today's program originate? Well, it finds its roots in the final moments of Ray Bradbury's classic novel, The Martian Chronicles, first published in 1950. In the last chapter called The Million Year Picnic, a mom and dad and their two children, Michael and Timothy, are some of the settlers on Mars who choose to forge a new life on the red planet, leaving everything from their old lives on Earth behind. Bradbury was writing at a time when most people still believed that Mars might have a breathable atmosphere, vestiges of a long vanished Martian civilization, and canals that interconnected the ruins of ancient Martian cities. Well, with that in mind, let's read the conclusion of the novel. You can follow along. They reached the canal. It was long and straight and cool and wet and reflective in the night. "I've always wanted to see a Martian," said Michael. "Where are they, Dad? You promised." "There they are," said Dad, and he shifted Michael on his shoulder and pointed straight down. The Martians were there. Timothy began to shiver. The Martians were there in the canal, reflected in the water. Timothy and Michael and Robert and Mom and Dad. The Martians stared back up at them for a long, long, silent time from the rippling water. So, once our generation travels to Mars, we won't find canals or ancient ruins, but we will be there. We will be the Martians. We will start over on a new world. And today's program explores what that may mean. So let's begin. Part one of our presentation, I call it the early days. Our line of demarcation today is 1965, when the Mariner 4 spacecraft took the first photos of Mars from a spacecraft and revealed what the planet was really like. Before 1965, we could only guess, and trust me, human imaginations often went wild. In early human history, Mars was a fiery red object that followed a strange looping path in the sky. As early as 4,000 years ago, the Babylonians studied astronomy and made careful observations of astronomical events like eclipses for their calendars and for religious reasons. The Babylonians called Mars Nergal, the great hero, the king of conflicts. The Egyptians were the first to notice that 5 bright objects in the sky, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, seemed to move in a repeating pattern over time. And they called Mars Har Desher, the red one. The Greeks and Romans developed a far more sophisticated sense of the planets and their movements. In fact, at least 2,500 years before Columbus, educated people in the eastern Mediterranean region knew that the Earth was not flat. No, it was round. And thanks to the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes, we had a pretty decent idea of Earth's diameter. Further, thanks to the great astronomers of the late Greek and early Roman Empire, like Hipparchus and Claudius Ptolemy, many men and women scholars, like Hypatia of Alexandria, knew the movements of the planets. The Greeks called the planet Ares, after their god of war, while the Romans called it Mars, whose sign was the shield and the sword. Now, other cultures had various myths and folk tales about Mars. For example, in one Hindu text, Mars is known as the deity Mangala and was born from the sweat of Shiva. The Hebrews named it Ma'adim, the one who blushes. Now, this is where one of the largest canyons on Mars, the Ma'adim Vallis, gets its name. Various Chinese culture refer to the planet as the fire star. In fact, in ancient China, the appearance of Mars in the night sky was taken as a portent for bane, grief, war, and murder, and is often associated with the fire god Zhurong, which was the name, by the way, chosen for the first Mars Chinese Mars rover that successfully landed on the red planet in 2021. Now, for many in the European Middle Ages, the planets of the solar system held special powers. The key to this power was told in the Picatrix, which introduced to Europe in 1256 uh, ideas about science, the cosmos, and philosophy. Well, when it comes to warfare, you can find several entries about Mars in the Picatrix, with one entry saying that a person should entreat Mars for the conquering of enemies, emboldening of hearts, tracking and hunting harmful animals, setting fires, war planning, and conquest over enemies. Now, moving forward, the 1870s became the beginning of 9 decades of sometimes frenzied speculation about Mars. Indeed, until the Mariner 4 mission in 1965 popped that bubble, every serious astronomer, writer, pundit, and painter had countless theories about Mars. And it began with the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli, who, from 1877 until 1886, began publishing a series of maps of Mars that used names of classical geography and descriptive terms derived from Latin. Most of those place names, by the way, are still in use today. Schiaparelli, who had to rely on the best telescopes of his day, believed that he saw, among other features on Mars, channels of darker color, especially during the Martian summer. He called the straight-lined features canali, which became translated into English as canals. And so the speculations began. Were Schiaparelli's seas and canals signs of seasons on Mars? Were they signs of intelligent civilization? Oh, imaginations ran wild. Well, Schiaparelli's contemporary, Percival Lowell, took the canal idea to the next level. For some 15 years, from 1893 to 1908, Lowell studied Mars extensively, making intricate drawings of the surface markings as he perceived them. Lowell published his views in 3 books: Mars in 1895, Mars and Its Canals in 1906, and in 1908, Mars as the Abode of Life. Well, with these readings, Lowell, more than anyone else, popularized the long-held belief that the markings seen on Mars, well, they show that Mars must sustain intelligent life. His works include a detailed description of what he termed the non-natural features of the planet's surface, including a full account of the canals, of the oases, which is what he called the dark spots at the intersection of canals, and of the varying visibility of both, depending partly on the Martian seasons. He theorized that an advanced but desperate culture had built the canals to trap Mars's polar ice caps, the last source of water on an inexorably drying planet. And none other than the wizard of electrical power, Nikola Tesla, actually thought he received messages from the planet Mars. While working on scientific experiments in Colorado in 1901, one evening Tesla heard what he thought were faint signals from beyond Earth, a series of three repeating beats, one after the other, these little beeps. While Tesla's claim that he had heard a message from Mars became national news, though the scientific community pretty much dismissed the idea, Tesla became convinced that communication with civilizations beyond Earth, like one on Mars, was not only possible, but probable. Now, all of this led to a flurry of speculation in literature, radio, and film. Now, the granddaddy of all Martian novels, rooted firmly in the work of Schiaparelli and Lowell, remains one of the great literary classics, especially because the science within its pages is actually quite sound and plausible. H.G. Wells' War of the World was a stunner in 1897 and an immediate success, and it remains such to this day. The American pulp novelist Edgar Rice Burroughs entertained millions of readers over 4 decades with his 11 novels set on Mars. Between 1912 and 1941, Burroughs introduced us to John Carter and the wonders of Barsoom, that was his name for Mars, with its atmospheric machines, its drying canals, and its shrinking, often warring civilizations. It's not high literature, but it's wonderful adventure writing. Ray Bradbury's 1950 The Martian Chronicles, which we quoted earlier, is a classic of storytelling, which includes the ghosts of the ancient Martians haunting the newly established colonies sent from Earth. In a series of 27 stories that span a period of a little over a quarter century, Bradbury follows the lives of the first human settlers on Mars and their often emotionally complex encounters with the quote unquote old ones. The great Arthur C. Clarke, known to most of us as the author of 2001: A Space Odyssey, created his first full-length novel in 1951. Called The Sands of Mars, it's a highly realistic look at the advantages and disadvantages of human colonization of another world. It also explores the still controversial concept of terraforming. And here's where I just want to throw in a little sidebar about terraforming. The terraforming of Mars would consist of planetary-wide engineering projects that would transform the planet from an inhospitable desert into a world suitable for permanent human habitation without the aid of spacesuits and specialized buildings. And the name kind of says it, right? Terra, Earth, Earth forming. We're going to Earth form Mars, right? The process would involve the modification of the planet's climate, atmosphere, and surface through a variety of mechanical ecological systems. Now, both before and after 1965, many concerned scientists raised ethical concerns, especially if any kind of life were to be found on Mars. In other words, would humans become invaders who destroyed life? There are no easy answers or solutions to the question of terraforming. Yet, for some, the possibility of transforming Mars remains on the table. Well, meanwhile, let's end the pre-1965 literary adventures with one of the masters of sci-fi literature, Robert Heinlein. Between 1947 and 1958, Scribner's published 12 of his young adult novels, the third being an adventure story called Red Planet, which envisions the Martians as an ancient race of beings. And Podkayne of Mars, first serialized in 1962, tells the adventures of a 15-year-old girl and her younger brother who travel from their home on Mars to Venus. In 1961, Heinlein explored the idea of ancient Martians in his classic adult novel called Stranger in a Strange Land, imagining what it would be for a Martian to find himself on Earth. How would such a being comprehend the culture, politics, and zeitgeist of our planet? The award-winning novel became the first science fiction novel ever to enter the New York Times bestseller list. Meanwhile, in radio, Orson Welles' Mercury Theater version of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds on CBS Radio on October 30th of 1938 remains one of the first and greatest examples of mass hysteria caused by the media. Thousands of listeners were terrorized by the realistic reports of a Martian invasion set in New Jersey rather than England, the England of the original novel. In the days after the adaptation, widespread outrage was expressed in the media. The program's news bulletin format led to an outcry against the broadcasters and calls for regulation by the FCC. Wells apologized at a hastily called news conference the next morning. You can see that as the background photo on your screen. And no punitive action was taken, but the broadcast and subsequent publicity certainly made the 23-year-old Wells a household name. Now, as for pre-1965 film treatments of the Red Planet, well, between 1910's 4-minute long A Trip to Mars, in which giant creatures and dangerous trees create havoc, and a 1965 retelling of The Wizard of Oz called The Wizard of Mars, came a dozen or so features ranging from a Hollywood musical made in 1930 with Maureen O'Sullivan called Just Imagine, to adventure tales like a very engaging 1918 Danish feature called A Trip to Mars, Rocket Ship XM in 1950, Flight to Mars the following year, a scary but less than faithful film adaptation of The War of the Worlds in 1953, Conquest of Space in 1955, and the aforementioned 1958 scream out loud horror film, It, the Terror from Beyond Space, which, by the way, for movie trivia buffs, became the inspiration for the 1979 film Alien. Now, all of these films still assume that Mars had a breathable atmosphere, and nowhere does the fact that the gravity of Mars is two-thirds less than Earth's even enter into the picture. One of the best reviewed of the pre-Mariner 4 films is Robinson Crusoe of Mars, released in 1964. Like most other Mars-based movies, there are Martians, some of them very nice, and many of them not so much. But all in all, pretty much every pre-1965 book and film about Mars used old concepts about the planet to drive the storyline. And generally, if they appear, we see the Martians as dangerous beings. Well, let's segue now to the view of Mars after the Mariner 4 flight of 1965. We'll be looking at some of the specific missions to the planet in a few minutes, but first I want to show that much of the post-1965 ideas about Mars became just as fringe as the pre-1965 concepts. Despite knowing that Mars was basically a so-called dead planet, theories about Martians and civilizations saw a great revival in the 1990s and the first 2 decades of the 21st century. Thanks to satellites orbiting Mars and rovers on the planet's surface, some theorists claimed that they saw what appeared to be the ruins of pyramids, small buildings, and even monumental sculpted faces, not unlike the Sphinx in Egypt. Well, what mainstream scientists see as naturally occurring formations have become proof for some that there once was a vibrant civilization on the red planet. In other words, what might be a smear of butter on a piece of toast to you might be the face of a saint to someone seeking miracles. Now, some current theories even suggest that an ancient Martian civilization native to the planet didn't develop on Mars, but rather an extraterrestrial species used Mars as an outpost for exploring our solar system, including the planet Earth. For many of you, such an idea is probably way over the top, but it demonstrates how seriously entranced people are by the possibility of intelligent life on Mars and or elsewhere in the universe. Now, another popular theory in the post-1965 era, and one that has far more traction with mainstream scientists, is the concept of panspermia. Now, let me explain. Approximately 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth and other planets were beginning to form from smaller building blocks of dust, gas, rock, and ice. The leftover materials from planet formation became asteroids and comets. Then, between 3 and 4 billion years ago, a period known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, many of these asteroids and comets slammed into the inner planets, including Earth, and deposited, among other things, the water that would become our oceans. Well, a recent and widely accepted theory is that as asteroids and comets continued to hit Earth in later eons, they brought to our planet the amino acids and other organic materials that would become life on Earth. Some of those chunks of rock were pieces that had been knocked off the planet Mars. So some mainstream scientists believed that life on our planet was actually created not just from asteroids and comets, but from the pieces of other planets, like Mars. So here's a little 2-minute video from Insider Tech that explains panspermia and explains those possibilities. Now, the sound on the original is a little bit low, so you may have to turn up the sound on your devices. But I think this is well worth watching. There are closed captions. Now, let me make sure that we are sharing that screen. And here we go.
When it comes to the question of where and how did life start on the Earth, there are some interesting puzzles to do with an idea called panspermia. Panspermia is about the exchange of living things across the universe, in particular in our solar system. Some scientists feel that life may have had a better chance of getting started not on the Earth, but perhaps on Mars, because the early chemistry and environment of Mars would have been very, very different than it is today. But then that life could have been transferred to the Earth later on through, for example, the collision of asteroids, literally sending material from the surface of a planet out into space where it drifts in orbits that eventually bring it down to the surface of another planet. And we can find pieces of Mars here on the Earth. We suspect there are pieces of Earth on Mars. So there's definitely been an exchange of material. If that material can actually carry living organisms with it, it is possible either that we are Martians or any life on Mars is actually from Earth. That's a really big question right now, is whether or not there's been natural cross-contamination of life between planets in our solar system. How might we tell whether or not we're related to Martians or Martians are related to us? Well, obviously, we can look at the molecular structure of life, delve into the gene sequence, into the DNA code itself, and to look for pieces of the code that are to do with very common molecules, pieces of the machinery of life. For example, things called ribosomes that help read out our DNA, build proteins in our cells. If we find the gene sequence for ribosomes in an organism on Mars, that might point to a common origin for life.
Okay, so there you have, and trust me, that is very much a mainstream concept now. Now, taking the idea one step further, some theorists believe that if, and this is a big if there had been an intelligent alien species using Mars as a way station, they may have come to Earth and purposefully seeded our planet with the basic building blocks of life. Now, such a process is called directed panspermia, which occurs when an advanced alien civilization spreads life to other planets purposefully. And think about that. Yes, someday, when we human beings go to other planets, we might be seeding those planets with our life forms. So, in a sense, we would be directing panspermia. So, when we actually colonize Mars, many respected mainstream scientists feel that we humans will actually be returning home. Bottom line, from the 19th century on, there were and are theorists who believe that Mars was possibly home to an intelligent alien species who visited Earth. And today, there are substantial numbers of scientists and scholars who believe that Mars was once a source for building block materials, or perhaps even microbial life, that got transferred to Earth by that process of panspermia, either by accident or on purpose. And that's how we get the title of today's program. We are the Martians. Okay, now that we've explored some of the prevailing ideas about Mars before 1965, let's move from the hypothetical into the realm of actual scientific reality. As of June 2025, so this month, there have been 47 attempted missions to Mars made by 8 individual nations and the European Union. Several never got off the launch pad, but of those that did make it, 20 have failed, 9 have partially failed, or you could say 9 have partially succeeded, and 17 have been successful. Now, I've put this link on my webpage, and it's a really great resource tool. Let me just quickly show you. And once again, let me make sure that I'm sharing that screen. Okay. A Wikipedia page, and it's a very good one. Sometimes Wikipedia can be a mixed bag, right? But this is an excellent one. I've done some deep diving into this. This is right on target. And what it does is it lists all of humankind's missions to Mars, and it lists the name of the spacecraft, the operator, the outcome, and so forth. So, for example, the very first mission to Mars in 1960 was by the Soviet Union, and unfortunately, it never got off the ground. But it lists anything in green as successful, and it's a really, really good um, resource, and that is on my website. Now, what we're going to do for the sake of time is we can't look through 47 attempted missions, but I'm going to give you a baker's dozen. The first mission, one of NASA's greatest early success stories, became the demarcation line between what we thought Mars was and what we now knew it to be. And on March the 15th of 1965, Mariner 4 flew within 6,000 miles of Mars and took 22 photos in glorious black and white. You could see the route there on your screen. They were the first photos ever taken of another planet from space. In addition to providing key information about how to safely deliver future missions to the Martian surface, it gave scientists the shocking truth. Images of craters and measurements of a much thinner than expected atmosphere indicated a dead world. As a result, Mariner 4 generally dissipated any hopes of finding intelligent life on Mars. Indeed, if native life ever had been on Mars, most concluded it probably would have been microscopic at best. However, and most importantly, Mariner 4 did identify geological signs that water may once have flowed on the planet's surface, as indicated by the apparent downward wash on the sides of some craters. This possibility of water would shape all Mars missions that followed and keep alive a flicker of hope regarding past or even present microbial life on Mars. Then, in the summer of 1976, NASA's Viking project became the first U.S. mission to land a spacecraft safely on the surface of Mars and return images of the surface. Two identical spacecraft, Viking 1 and Viking 2, each consisted of an orbiter and a lander. After achieving Mars' orbit, the lander separated and descended to the planet's surface. The Viking 1 lander touched down on the western slope of Cheris Planitia, the Plains of Gold, on July 20th of 1976, while the Viking 2 lander settled down on Utopia Planitia on September the 3rd. Now, besides taking photographs and collecting other science data on the Martian surface, the two landers conducted biological experiments designed to look for possible signs of life. Now, these experiments discovered unexpected and enigmatic chemical activity, but didn't provide any clear evidence for the presence of life, living microorganisms in the soil near the landing sites. Now, according to scientists then and now, the surface of Mars is self-sterilizing. But what about below the surface? Oh, the results were ambiguous at best. Each Viking mission was planned for about a 90-day stay. However, each orbiter and lander operated far beyond that. Viking Orbiter 1 continued for 4 years, while Viking Orbiter 2 functioned until July of 1978. And despite the variations in available sunlight and the presence of dust storms, the last data from Viking Lander 2 was received in 1980, just shy of its 4th birthday, and Viking Lander 1 made its final transmission to Earth in 1982, over 6 years after it first landed. So much for the 90-day warranty. Now, though both Viking missions ended decades ago, believe it or not, scientists are still poring over the data. And a small minority of scientists argue that the Viking biology experiment results were positive for life on Mars. In fact, in 2016, astrobiologists Gilbert Levin and Patricia Stratt published a perspective piece in the journal Astrobiology, in which they reconsidered the results of the Viking experiments in light of recent findings on Mars. They argue that Martian microbes should still be considered as the best explanation for the original ambiguous results. Now, number 4 on our list is the Mars Global Surveyor, developed by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and launched in 1996. MGS was a global mapping mission that examined the entire planet from its ionosphere right down to the surface. And among other things, the MGS found indications, once again, of running or melting water on the sides of cliffs and craters, similar to the indications made by Mariner 4 decades earlier. This was, of course, exciting, because where there's water, there might be life. The MGS remained in operation until 2006. Number 5 on our list is Pathfinder, which was an American robotic spacecraft that landed on Mars in July of 1997. It consisted of a lander named the Carl Sagan Memorial Station and a 23-pound robotic Mars rover named Sojourner, the first rover to operate on another planet. The landing site was an ancient floodplain in Mars's northern hemisphere called Ares Vallis. Scientists chose it because it appeared to contain a wide variety of rocks deposited during what might have been a catastrophic flood. But the thing that made Pathfinder stand out was the unique way in which it was delivered to the surface. It didn't land. It bounced. Here's a video from Retrospace HD of that momentous landing. Mission control is on your left, and the animation of the landing is on your right. And again, you may have to adjust the sound on your devices. And I want to make sure that I am sharing the sound. And okay, here we go. Whoops. Okay, well, we got that. We have to do this. Okay, and here again, let's double check. Sharing sound. And there we go. So here you go. This is a hoot.
30 seconds till entry. The next event is peak aero entry heating and peak deceleration, which will occur in about 50 seconds. Parachute should now be deployed. It's slowing down rapidly because of parachute deployment. The heat shield should separate in about 3, 2, 1, 0 seconds. The next event is lander separation. That should occur in about 5 seconds. When that occurs, the lander will descend in about 10 seconds down the bridle. Planetary separation should have occurred right about now. Spacecraft should have passed the 600 mark. Airbag should be inflated. Rockets should be firing. And bridle should be cut. DDL-COM has reported that a signal is barely visible. It's a very good sign, everybody.
And there it is. It landed safely, but I love that. It bounced to Mars. It didn't land. Okay, well, one of the biggest findings of that mission was the discovery of rounded pebbles and cobbles that strongly suggested that the landscape had been formed by running water during a warmer and distant past. Coming in at number 6 is the 2001 Mars Odyssey orbiter, which began in 2001 and is still going strong today. Two prime goals of the orbiter's mission is to detect past or present evidence of water and ice, and to search for evidence that life exists or once existed on Mars. The mission is named in tribute of Arthur C. Clarke, evoking the name of his novel and film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Next up, we have Spirit and Opportunity, who also bounced their way to glory, lasting years beyond their 90-day guarantee. Spirit lasted for 6 years, and Opportunity celebrated 14 years. Spirit landed at Gusev crater, a possible former lake in a giant impact crater, and Opportunity landed at Meridiani Planum, a place where mineral deposits suggested that Mars had a wet history. Now, all of the top science results from both of these rovers found that large areas of Mars were once soaked in salty waters. Opportunity found proof that acidic water once soaked areas of Mars in the ancient past, and Spirit confirmed that outcrops of rocks contain minerals that indicated a past environment that was wet and possibly favorable to life. At outcrops called Comanche and Algonquin, named in honor of Native American tribes, Spirit found rocks rich in key chemicals such as magnesium and iron carbonates. These rocks formed when Mars was warm and wet, had a thicker carbon dioxide atmosphere, and possessed near neutral pH water. This warmer, watery environment could have supported life. Spirit also explored an elevated plateau known as Home Plate in the Columbia Hills. It discovered a patch of nearly pure silica, which only forms in the presence of water and could have harbored microbial life at one time. Meanwhile, near the rim of Endeavour crater, Opportunity found bright-colored veins of gypsum in the rocks, and these rocks were very likely, I should say, formed when water flowed through underground fractures in the rocks, leaving calcium behind. It's a slam dunk sign that Mars was once more hospitable to life than it is today. So as you can see, discovery after discovery by both of these rovers affirmed that there might have been the conditions for primitive life on the planet Mars. But by 2 or 3 billion years ago, the climate, dwindling atmosphere, a shrinking magnetic field, and other factors on Mars pretty much precluded any life getting much beyond simple forms. Still, you can only imagine how all of this has become fodder for ancient alien theorists. Meanwhile, let's close this chapter with the last photo montage taken by Spirit. What you see on your screen is a stunning panorama of Gustav crater. And that brings us to number 9, the Mars Reconnaissance Rover. The MRO started operating in 2006, and like the Odyssey orbiter, it's still operating today. Most importantly, it has discovered pure ice water in new craters, and further evidence that liquid water once flowed on the surface of Mars. Our number 10 is the NASA Curiosity rover that landed on Mars in 2012 and is still operating. Curiosity is a car-sized vehicle exploring Gale Crater and Mount Sharp. The 6 biggest finds have been: Curiosity has found evidence of persistent liquid water in the past. Curiosity has found that ancient Mars had sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and carbon, all of which are key ingredients necessary for life. Organic molecules were discovered in several samples drilled from Mount Sharp. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there was or is life on Mars, but it means that ancient organic materials can be preserved for us to recognize and study today. Now, number 4, an important find, is the active presence of methane in Mars's atmosphere. This discovery is exciting because methane can be produced in only 2 ways. One is by living organisms, or it can be produced by chemical reactions between rock and water. The question is, which of these 2 processes is producing methane on Mars? Stay tuned. Number 5, new information about surface radiation is letting scientists design better spacesuits and create better models for future habitats. And last but not least, as the illustration shows, the desert planet we know today was once a water world like Earth. Now, does that mean life? Well, the jury is still out, but, as I like to say, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Now, in recent years, other nations have gotten into the Mars race. The Mars Orbiter mission was India's first interplanetary mission. It made India the first Asian nation to reach Martian orbit and the first nation to do so on its first attempt. The orbiter measured atmospheric conditions, photographed the Martian moon Phobos, and explored various geological aspects of the planet. The orbiter was officially decommissioned in 2022. And I'm going to just make a pause here. We, of course, want to send our thoughts and our prayers to India this evening in light of the terrible airplane crash that occurred there earlier today that killed so many hundreds of people. The Tianwen-1, which means questioning the heavens, was China's first mission to Mars, consisting of an orbiter, which you see on your screen, and a rover named Zhurong. Zhurong landed on May the 14th of 2021. And among the rover's science instruments was a radar that could detect pockets of water beneath the surface. Zhurong ceased operating in December of 2022, but it was a very successful mission. And coming in at number 13, our baker's dozen, We have the Mars 2020 mission by NASA that successfully landed Perseverance, a car-sized rover, in 2021, and its cargo, Ingenuity, which is a helicopter. Now, while Perseverance continues to make amazing geological discoveries, the real triumph of the mission had to do with flight. And that brings us to Ingenuity. I'll let this excellent 5-minute report from CNET show you. And once again, you may have to adjust the sound on your devices, but enjoy. And it has just a lot of really cool information, not only about Ingenuity, but why this was such an achievement.
Humans just flew a helicopter on Mars, and we've got pictures to prove it. After more than 6 years of development, a long flight to Mars, and some nerve-wracking delays, NASA has finally launched and landed its Ingenuity helicopter.
Altimeter data confirms that Ingenuity has performed its first flight, the first flight of a powered aircraft to another planet.
This is the first powered and controlled flight we've ever completed on another planet, and NASA had to overcome some pretty impossible odds to do it. In fact, there was a chance this flight might not have happened at all. During a final high-speed test of the rotors, the helicopter's systems aborted, and NASA had to beam up a software update from Earth. But Ingenuity finally took to the Martian skies, and thanks to cameras on board the helicopter and on the Perseverance rover, we got an amazing view. A black and white camera on the bottom of the helicopter gave us shots looking down on the Martian surface, while a color camera gave us a view of the horizon. But it wasn't just the cameras on Ingenuity. Percy the rover was watching the whole thing. There are 2 mast cams on Perseverance that sit about 2 meters or 6 feet off the ground. These cameras recorded both a close-up and wide-angle view of the flight as Ingenuity spun up its rotor blades, lifted into the air, and then slowly landed back down. Ingenuity had to conserve battery power after its flight, so NASA was only able to downlink a couple of black and white images shot by the chopper itself. But the Mastcam Z system recorded the flight in full color, giving us an awesome view. Ingenuity's flight was billed as a technology demonstration, part of the larger Perseverance rover mission which touched down on Mars on February 18th. The rover is there to find signs of ancient life on the red planet, and it's already achieved a number of firsts, sending back the first full-color video of a Mars landing and the first audio from the planet's surface. But after Perseverance nailed the landing, it was time for Ingenuity's moment in the spotlight. The helicopter travelled to Mars tucked under the belly of the rover, which is about the size of a compact car. Ingenuity might be a featherweight compared to Papa Percy, but it's also a seriously impressive piece of machinery. It's completely autonomous and self-charging, with 2 pairs of 4-foot-wide rotor blades that counter-rotate to lift off in the Martian atmosphere. The atmosphere on Mars is 1% the density of the atmosphere on Earth, meaning there's not much for the rotor blades to push against to gain lift, and that was a huge challenge for the NASA engineers. That's why the blades had to be so wide. They need to spin at more than 2,500 RPM to actually lift the helicopter off the ground. Ingenuity also needed to be incredibly light. The entire body, including the solar panel, batteries, computers, rotor blades, and landing gear, had to come in at 1,800 grams, or less than 4 pounds. According to the project lead for Ingenuity, Mimiang, that involved a lot of iterating and shaving off unnecessary mass, ounce by ounce. But even with all those weight concerns, NASA did hide one little Easter egg on Ingenuity, a piece of the Wright brothers' plane Kitty Hawk, which took the first powered, controlled flight on Earth in 1903. Now, more than a century after the first flight on our planet, humans have done the same thing with a 4-pound helicopter flying itself on another planet more than 100 million miles away. To get to this point, Ingenuity had to survive a 7-month journey through space, followed by 7 minutes of terror as its rover descended to the Martian surface. Perseverance had to blast off the helicopter's protective shield and gently place it on the rocky surface of Mars. The helicopter had to survive its first sub-zero night, charge up its batteries by itself using its solar panels, and then spin up its rotor blades for the first time to make sure they actually worked on Mars. And despite a couple of technical difficulties, it passed with flying colours. NASA only had a relatively small window to test fly its own, 30 sols or Martian days, which is about equivalent to 31 Earth days. They played it pretty safe with this first flight, but now they have the chance to do 4 more flights, going higher and further and potentially even recording sound. And all of these flights are going to bring in more data and more images for the world to see. And that's the real potential of Ingenuity. It's proof that we can bring an aerial dimension to our exploration of new worlds. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be sending little drones to scout around new planets and venture to places that humans can't reach. Like the Wright brothers and Kitty Hawk, this is just the first liftoff, but it's the start of so much more.
It's the start of so much more, indeed. Just to fill you in, to bring you up to date, that little helicopter made 72 separate flights, some of them almost a mile away from the Perseverance rover, and went to pretty decent altitudes as well. But on January the 18th of 2024, one of the rotor blades broke during a landing. That's on that 72nd flight. And that unfortunately has permanently grounded the helicopter. But despite that mishap, the overall mission of the helicopter on another planet was remarkable. So our image of Mars before 1965 was radically changed by everything we discovered after 1965. It's truly remarkable and often mind-blowing. And that post-65 age of discovery and exploration leads us directly into, yes, the arts. Just as writers before 1965 were mesmerized by the possibility of Mars, they continue to be bowled over now. Dozens of mainstream novels have been written since Mariner 4, most with the new desert-like Mars as the backdrop. Here are just a few worth noting. In 1966, the eminent speculative fiction writer Philip K. Dick wrote the novella I Can Remember It For You Wholesale, in which a man named Douglas Quayle realizes that he has suppressed memories of being an agent on Mars. Well, that story became the basis for the 1990 Arnold Schwarzenegger blockbuster called Total Recall. The Greening of Mars by James Lovelock and Michael Allaby, published in 1984, details the story of how the colonization of Mars began, which includes a new race of genetically altered humans, of great hydrogen-filled airships used for transportation, and of a cold, oxygen-poor planet transformed into a habitable home through terraforming. In 1992, the sci-fi master Ben Bova published Mars, which realistically portrays the many dangers associated with a Mars mission, but also convincingly presents the possibility that an intelligent species might once have lived on the planet. Bova continued the saga in Return to Mars in 1999 and Mars Life in 2008. The Mars trilogy, Red Mars, Green Mars, and Blue Mars by the eminent writer Kim Stanley Robinson, published between 1992 and 1996, is a series that brilliantly chronicles the settlement and terraforming of the planet Mars through the detailed viewpoints of a wide variety of characters spanning almost 2 centuries. The award-winning novel Moving Mars by Greg Bear was published in 1993. In it, we learn that Mars is a colonial world governed by corporate interests on Earth, and that a second and third generation of Martians have a very strong belief that their planet can be independent. It's really quite exciting and politically astute. Finally, a masterpiece of storytelling is Andy Weir's 2014 best-selling novel, The Martian. There's even a young reader's version, which strips away the often salty language that's used today in many junior and senior high schools around the country. The story follows an American astronaut, Mark Watney, as he becomes stranded alone on Mars and must improvise in order to survive. Well, like the pre-1965 films about Mars, those made after 65 can also be pretty cheesy. Indeed, a whole bunch of B movies, including Rocket Man, The Last Days on Mars, and Tim Burton's campy Mars Attacks, have been made since 1965. But fortunately, there have also been some thoughtful looks that are truly worth a look. There's Total Recall from 1990 that we spoke of a few moments ago. Red Planet, released in 2000, which is a realistic look at planet exploration and terraforming. And Brian De Palma's Mission to Mars, also from 2000, which explores the rather mystical possibilities of a past civilization on Mars and directed panspermia. Now, though Steven Spielberg's 21st century version of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds leaves out any specific reference to Mars, it's actually quite faithful to the original Victorian-era novel and has some fine acting and truly hair-raising visual effects. Another fine literary adaptation is John Carter from 2012 that brings the first 3 novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom saga to life. It's generally very faithful to the original novels. And finally, there's the film adaptation of The Martian from 2015 by Ridley Scott. It became a blockbuster that realistically portrays the trials and tribulations that astronauts may encounter when they attempt to explore the Red Planet. And before we move on, in addition to My Favorite Martian, there have been a number of television series that have brought us to the Red Planet, including the 1967 British series Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, a 1983 adaptation of Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, the superb series The Expanse, and episodes of that classic British series Doctor Who. Now, I've included a link on my website if you'd like to explore these and other TV shows and films in more depth. All of this brings us to our final section, Part 3, Human Exploration. Before we look at specific possibilities, let's look at ways in which NASA and other space organizations around the world are preparing future astronauts and colonizers for the daunting task of living on the Red Planet, where the gravity is 66% less than that of Earth, with intense radiation, and, as we've been hearing, only 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. And one of the ways that NASA is helping astronauts prepare for current long-term missions to both the Moon and Mars is through the CHAPP program, the inaugural Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog, CHAPP. That mission began in June of 2023 when a 4-person volunteer crew entered a new home at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston to begin a 378-day Mars surface simulation. The successful mission ended in July of 2024. This was the first of 3 planned missions, with one set for 2025, for this year, and another for 2026. Of course, that all depends on current budget battles. NASA will use research gained from CHAPP to determine how to best support crew health and performance while living on the Moon and eventually on Mars during a long-duration exploration mission. During the CHAPP simulations, crew members will carry out simulated spacewalks, robotic operations, habitat maintenance, personal hygiene, exercise, and crop growth. And to be realistic as feasible, NASA will present the crew with simulated stressors such as resource limitations, isolation, and even equipment failure. Now, as for an actual Mars mission, we have Artemis, which is a robotic and human exploration program that will lead humans first to the moon and then to Mars. It's led by the United States National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, along with 6 major partner agencies: the European Space Agency, the German Aerospace Center, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, the Israel Space Agency, and the Italian Space Agency. The general idea is to have a working base on the moon on or around 2032. And that, of course, is speculative time frame. Let's stay tuned. And yes, I said the moon. Why? Because depending on funding and the American political climate, over the course of 5 to 10 years, the moon itself and the Gateway space station orbiting the moon will be the launch pad for the first human mission to Mars. Meanwhile, China has built its equivalent to Chat-P in the Gobi Desert, where it is training astronauts for its first planned human mission to Mars somewhere around 2033. And it will then build a permanently inhabited base on the Red Planet. Further, the Mars Society, a nonprofit international organization, advocates for human Mars exploration and colonization. It was founded in 1998 by Robert Zubrin, an American aerospace engineer and advocate for space exploration. I recommended his book earlier in this program tonight. And it aims to make a human mission to Mars as lightweight and feasible as possible, which may, underline may, mean controversially, one-way trips. Since its founding, the Mars Society has operated the Mars Desert Station, which you see on your screen, and the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station. Both of the stations are placed in remote locations that aim to replicate a true Mars mission for research. Now, as of June 2025, this month, SpaceX and NASA are also working together on developing rocket and launch systems to reach Mars. SpaceX is currently aiming for a mission in the early 2030s. Now, to this point, SpaceX has had a decent track record with its rockets, but there have also been some serious partial failures of its mammoth Starship rocket that will require more time. Once again, stay tuned. Now, while the first Artemis habitats on Mars will probably be similar to those constructed on the moon and look like those that you're seeing on your screen right now, most mainstream scientists and planners anticipate that long-term habitation will be primarily underground, inside one or more of the thousands of lava tubes that were formed when Mars was volcanically active hundreds of millions of years ago. Another possibility to a long-term human presence on Mars is terraforming, which we've already spoken about a few times this evening. But it's important to reiterate that aside from many technological obstacles, one of the biggest concerns remains an ethical one. Will we potentially be destroying life, including microbial life, that might one day evolve into higher forms, just as we once evolved from lowly microbes? Now, a final thought as we move towards our conclusion. Becoming multi-planet colonists might lead us to become a multi-planet species. After 2 or 3 generations, humans born on Mars, with its much lower gravity and its greater distance from the sun, would begin to evolve. And 4th and 5th generation Martians would probably never be able to visit Earth without the physical assistance of exoskeletons and breathing apparatuses. And that brings us back to the quote from Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles that we began with. The Martians were there, in the canal, reflected in the water. Timothy and Michael and Robert and Mom and Dad. The Martians stared back up at them for a long, long silent time from the rippling water. So, if we go to Mars, we will become the Martians. And if the theories of panspermia or directed panspermia are correct, we may actually be returning home. So there you have a 75-minute overview of what we once thought of Mars, what we've done to explore it, and what we plan on doing in terms of exploration and colonization. Remember, for more information, please go to my website, makingwings.net, and visit Deeper Dive number 77. But now, before we talk about next month's program, I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas. Thank you for being here tonight.
All right. I did put the link to the survey in the chat. If you've got any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat as well.
Do we have any?
We don't have any questions. We've got a comment. Bill Thierfelder is the best of the best. His lectures are always comprehensive, informative, and extremely interesting.
Well, thank you. That was very nice. Thank you. Any other thoughts? I've given you a lot to think about.
Okay, here's a question. Which is more hospitable to man, Moon or Mars?
It would probably be Mars, simply because even though it's further away, it actually has more things that we could use, maybe some more raw materials. There is at least a little bit of an atmosphere. There are lava tubes that we could live in. Now, we can do the same thing on the moon. But there are just some things that scientists feel Mars might be the better of the two planets. And for those scientists that think that terraforming might be the way to go, again, Mars gives us a soup starter. In a sense, it already has something, though it's very small, a viable atmosphere and so forth. So Mars kind of tweaks out, with 52%, let's say, of the vote.
And then we have a comment as well. This is not specific to Mars, but there is a special exhibit at the Linda Hall Library on the UMKC campus titled Life Beyond Earth. I took a picture of a quote by Arthur C. Clarke. Two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. The belief of many of the scientists is that there is life out there somewhere, but not necessarily in our galaxy.
Absolutely. I love that. Yes. And, to keeping with the Mars theory, with our Mars subject matter tonight, most mainstream scientists believe that, at best, the life that may have developed on Mars was probably, like on Earth, microbial. But there are a group of people that think that there might be life elsewhere in our galaxy and in other galaxies that may have traveled to our solar system and may have visited some of the planets within our solar system and may have actually used Mars as a location. and from Mars kind of as a home base spread out to some of the other planets. Who knows? But there is that fascination that, what's the great line of Ellie Arroway in the movie Contact, right? It would be an awful waste of space if we were the only living creatures in the universe. So I think most scientists now, just in our galaxy alone, where we have over 100 billion different stars, most of those stars have at least one or more planets. Is it possible? It seems kind of unlikely that of all those hundreds of billions of planets surrounding hundreds of billions of stars, that we're the only life. So, it's as Arthur C. Clarke said, that's both a terrifying idea, but also, if we really are the only thing, that's an equally terrifying idea.
Let's see. Someone else asked, what about the magnetic fields?
Yes. The Earth has a magnetic field which protects us from dangerous cosmic rays and other kinds of things from the sun, such as the solar wind, as well as gamma rays from other stars within our galaxy. And we know that we have a magnetic field for those of us lucky enough to see occasionally the aurora borealis in the sky. Mars once also had a magnetic field, but as its core cooled down and no longer rotated within the planet, the magnetic field died down. Without a magnetic field, the sun's solar wind and cosmic rays and gamma rays and all kinds of radiation could bombard the planet and would make life, certainly on the actual surface, very, 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 very difficult. And it's probably also then what wiped out the atmosphere that was once much thicker on Mars. And without an atmosphere, that accounts for why the water of the Martian oceans went away. So a magnetic field is a very important thing. Many of the moons and some of the planets in our solar system, not just Earth, have magnetic fields. And that then allows the possibility for viable life. Places like Mercury, for example, and Mars that don't have viable magnetic or large magnetic fields, that's a little, or the moon, and that makes life a little tough. So magnetic field is an important ingredient to have life.
Let's see. Is Musk's pursuit of Mars at any cost worth it? Isn't returning to the moon more realistic and economical?
It's a combo package. The both SpaceX, NASA, and the 8 space agencies that are involved in the Artemis project. And if you look up the logo for Artemis, it shows the moon, but it also shows a little red arrow facing to Mars. To get from the Earth to the moon right now is an expensive proposition because it takes a lot of power to lift a rocket off of our planet. Once you can establish bases on Mars, on the moon, and can establish the Gateway space station going around the moon, there you can launch vehicles to Mars very inexpensively because you're not competing with having to have spacecraft with large amounts of liquid or nuclear fuel to power your rockets. So initially, yes, it may be difficult to get to the moon, but initially it will also be more expensive to get there. Ultimately, it will be cheaper to go from the moon to Mars than it will be to go from the Earth to the moon, if you follow this little sequence that I've just given. Mars just has much more opportunity for us, and the fact that it has Gravity, okay, yes, it's only 66% of Earth. Um, the moon is a micro of that. I mean, the moon has barely enough gravity to keep you down. I mean, if you could do the 50-yard leaps on the moon. Mars with its gravity, Mars with the beginnings of an atmosphere, et cetera, just provides more opportunities for human beings to survive. Because after a while, if you live for example, if you live in an environment with an extremely low gravity like that of the moon, um, the human body as we know it would simply deteriorate. Which is why some scientists think that if we did have long-term colonization of the moon and Mars, we will probably evolve genetically to compensate for that. That's a very long answer to that question. Sorry.
Somebody else asked, what would be the purpose of a colony on Mars? 100% scientific research?
Initially, I think it would be very much like the bases in Antarctica. Yes, they would probably be scientific. But there comes a point that many scientists believe take this all with a grain of salt. This is a group, many scientists believe that as we human beings kind of wear out planet Earth, that we may need to expand to other planets. But there's also the exploration aspect of this. Just as Asians and Europeans eventually Asian peoples branched out and colonized and inhabited. I don't want to use the word colonizing because that has such a negative connotation, but explored and inhabited the Pacific Ocean. And as European nations began to explore North and South America, we're just an inquisitive species. And I think the next step is going to be, well, let's go to the next frontier. Well, the next frontier are the planets and the moons within our solar system. But indeed, some scientists feel that at a certain point, this may be a necessity. Now, of course, that raises the question, when you move with you. And by that, I mean, if you have bad habits here on Earth that are doing a number on the environment, might you not bring that same to the planet, to the planets that we're moving to? But hopefully we will have learned a lesson and not repeat the mistakes that we made here on Earth, on the moon, or on Mars, which is the hope of TV shows like Star Trek.
In that vein, we have a question. If there is no water on Mars now, how would people colonize it?
Okay, well, I want to make clear that what has been found by Mars Odyssey and others is that there actually is water on Mars. There are two polar caps, very much like our North and South Pole. And there is pretty good evidence that there is underground water on Mars, as there are, by the way, on many of the moons on that go around other planets. We're a very watery solar system. There are actual oceans in some of the moons of Jupiter, for example. So there's water on every planet, even on Mercury, so close to the sun, frying away. They have found water ice in the crevices of craters. So yes, there is some water on Mars that can be a soup starter. And then, of course, one can manufacture water from elements found there, such as oxygen and hydrogen, which does exist on Mars, albeit in small quantities. But there is water on Mars.
And then somebody says, I enjoyed Ron Howard's series called Mars a couple years ago.
Yes.
What is your opinion as to how technically realistic it is?
Right. And you may remember at the very beginning of the program, perhaps you weren't here for that part, I recommended that series. And it is on my website. It's an excellent series. It's a docudrama. It's both a documentary and then they intersperse it with scenes of, what might it be like you know, if we move there. I like the series. I like the book that went along with the series. Great Nat Geo series, and I think that um, certainly the last episode aired in 2018, and I think it's still pretty accurate. I think the general ideas are still very, very accurate. What's going to change with some of these series is if we actually do find, for example, microbial life on Mars. That's going to rewrite everything, because that means we really literally are not alone anymore. And that might change the how we explore planets, because one of the great fears, and I brought it up a few times in this program tonight, is that if we go to a planet that already has microbial life, will we be a detriment to that life? I mean, if you follow major scientific theory, we human beings, well, all life on the planet started microbially and then developed. Would we be impinging upon the development of life on another planet if we find microbial life there and we just decide, oh, let's plant ourselves? We don't want to we don't want to make the mistakes of, in air quotes, colonizing and just taking over. We don't want to destroy the life on a planet. So that becomes a very serious consideration.
We had a couple questions and comments regarding UFOs and alien life. We're out of time for this evening, so I'm going to say we save that for another time and another program, because I know you have one on that topic.
Yes, I do.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And thank you, Dr. Thierfelder, again, for a wonderful program.
Thank you. And I'll be back on July 31st. And tonight we spent 75 minutes on Mars. Well, next month it'll be 75 minutes in Missouri with Mark Twain.
All right. Have a great evening, everybody.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.